The scrape of the wooden chair echoed as my own son shoved me back from the Christmas table I'd sat at for decades. Still, I steadied that same chair with one hand, letting its rough edge remind me not to react in anger. As the sound faded, it carried every year I'd paid his bills, fixed his house, and showed up without being wanted. While the room filled with laughter meant for someone else's father, the chair's empty space told me where I truly stood. The same scrape replayed in my head, turning humiliation into absolute clarity. That's when I stepped outside, dialed a single number, and decided the seat they stole from me would cost them far more than they expected. Before the story begins, tell me, where are you watching from? I hope your day's gentle and calm. Please like, subscribe, and let's start our story together. Snow clung to Tom Beckett's coat like powdered sugar as he stepped onto his son's front porch, balancing two warm homemade pies against his chest. He'd made the same ones every Christmas since Jason was a kid, pecan and apple, the kind his late wife used to bake. For Tom, traditions were anchors, especially now, with December pressing on him heavier each year. He took a steadying breath, plastered on the same soft smile he'd worn for decades, and rang the bell. He could already hear the chatter inside, Lindsay's bright, practiced laughter, Marilyn's polished hum, and the deeper, confident rumble of Edward Pierce, a man who always seemed to talk like he owned every room he entered. The door swung open and warm air hit him. Jason offered a quick, distracted, "Hey, Dad," barely looking at the pies before ushering Tom inside. The scent of rosemary, butter, and expensive wine drifted through the house. Tom blinked, adjusting to the sight. The dining room didn't look like Jason and Lindsay's house anymore. It was overdone, like a magazine spread, all gold-trimmed napkins, crystal glasses, a table centerpiece shaped like a metallic reindeer. Too extravagant for a young couple, too reminiscent of Lindsay's parents' taste in everything. Tom's eyes found his usual seat, third chair on the left, the one he'd taken since their first Christmas in this house. He'd sat there beside his son every year, even the year after his wife died, when the grief had hollowed him out and Jason insisted he shouldn't be alone. But tonight something felt off. He shifted the pies in his hands and made his way toward his chair. Before he could even set them down, Jason stepped quickly into his path. There was no room to pass. "Hold on, Dad." Tom paused, confused. "Just want to put these down before they get cold." Yeah, but not there." Jason's voice tightened. "That seat's not yours tonight." Tom blinked slowly, unsure he'd heard right. "What do you mean? I always sit." Jason cut him off. He placed a hand on Tom's chest and pushed, lightly but firmly. A shove meant to redirect, not injure, yet it sent a shockwave straight through Tom's ribs. "Dad," Jason said sharply, eyes flicking toward the far end of the table, "that seat's for my father-in-law." The warmth drained from Tom's face. For a moment, all he could do was stare at Jason, trying to understand how his son could say those words so easily. The room quieted, conversations dipped, even the clinking of silverware paused. Across the table, Edward Pierce leaned back in his chair with a slow, smug smile, as if the entire scene amused him. His expensive watch glinted under the chandelier. The message was clear: "Know your place, old man." Marilyn lifted her wine glass, pretending not to see anything, though Tom could feel her eyes skimming him with that calculated politeness she always used. Lindsay stepped forward, hands raised dramatically as if breaking up a fight. "Everyone relax, please, it's Christmas." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes held no apology. "Let's all just keep things festive, okay?" "Festive." Tom swallowed hard, his throat tightening around the word. He forced a nod, though his pulse hammered in his ears. He placed the pies on the far edge of the counter, away from the table, away from the family, and stepped back, unsure where he was supposed to stand, let alone sit. No chair had been left for him, not one. He lingered a moment longer, waiting for anyone to notice. To say, "Dad, come sit by me," or "Tom, here, take my seat." But the conversations resumed without him. Jason laughed at one of Edward's comments, leaning in too eagerly, as if trying to impress the man who'd replaced his own father at the table. Tom felt suddenly old in a way he never had before, like he was fading out of his own family's picture. He cleared his throat softly. "I think I'll head out early. Roads are getting bad." Jason looked up, startled. "What, you just got here?" "But I'm not needed," Tom said gently. "Enjoy your dinner." And before anyone could respond, before Lindsay could pretend to protest or Edward could smirk again, Tom stepped out the door. The cold H. It hit him like a slap. Snow had thickened on the walkway, crunching under his boots as he walked toward the empty street. The porch lights glowed behind him, warm and bright, but they didn't follow him. Not this year. Tom hugged his coat tighter around him, breath fogging the dark air. He'd lived through grief, through raising 2 kids on a builder's paycheck, through losing the love of his life. But somehow this small humiliation, this dismissal, cut deeper than anything he'd expected. As he reached the end of the street, he whispered into the wind, voice low, steady, almost frighteningly calm. "I won't forget this." And the snow kept falling, as if burying the warmth of the evening behind him, one cold, silent flake at a time. Snowflakes drifted around Tom like slow-falling ash as he made his way down the quiet street, each step sinking softly into the fresh powder. The cold bit at his cheeks, but he barely felt it. His mind was trapped in a loop he couldn't shut off. Jason's hand on his chest, the push, the firm dismissal. "Dad, that seat's for my father-in-law." The sentence replayed with cruel clarity. It wasn't loud, wasn't angry. It was worse. It was casual, practiced. The kind of thing you say when you've already decided someone no longer belongs. Tom stopped under a street lamp and closed his eyes. The sting of humiliation washed over him all over again, burning deeper than the winter wind. The light made his breath look like smoke as it drifted upward and vanished. He couldn't go home in silence. Not tonight. He reached into his coat and pulled out his phone, thumb trembling ever so slightly as he scrolled to Sarah's name. She always answered, no matter how late, no matter how tired she was from her overnight hospital shifts. She picked up on the second ring. "Dad, everything okay?" Tom forced a steady tone. "Hey, honey, just walking back. Wanted to say Merry Christmas." There was a pause, long enough for him to know she'd already sensed something. Sarah read emotion like a second language she always had. "You sound off. Did something happen at Jason's?" Tom swallowed, lips dry. No, it was a nice dinner." Another pause. "Dad, come on." He tried to offer a small laugh, but it cracked halfway out of his throat. "Just tired. Snow's heavy tonight." She softened her voice, but it tightened with worry. "You sure?" He wished he could tell her, but telling her would make it real, would make the humiliation permanent. "I'm fine, sweetheart, really. Go get some sleep." She didn't believe him, but she let him go with a quiet, "Call me if you need anything. I mean it." When the call ended, the silence hit even harder. Tom walked the remaining blocks slowly, his boots leaving a single trail across the untouched snow. By the time he reached his house, the small, warm place he'd kept spotless since his wife passed, the porch light he'd forgotten to turn off greeted him with a soft glow. He stepped inside, pulled off his gloves, and hung his coat carefully, methodically, as if any rushed movement might crack what was left of his dignity. He made tea, though he never drank it. He sat in his armchair without turning on a single light. He just stared at the dark, listening to the wind push against the windows. His phone buzzed on the table beside him. A message from Jason. "Sorry if you felt awkward tonight." Tom exhaled slowly. Not an apology, not even close. It was the kind of text you send when you want to avoid admitting you did something wrong, when you want to blame the other person for feeling something instead of owning the action that caused it. Tom read it twice, jaw tightening. "If you felt awkward, as though awkwardness had simply happened, as though Jason hadn't shoved his own father away from a chair he'd sat in for years. Tom set the phone face down. A quiet ache settled in him, not sharp, not sudden, but deep and familiar, like a bruise forming under old scar tissue. Morning crept in through gray clouds, and with it came a knock on the door. Tom opened it to find Frank Doyle standing on the porch, bundled in 2 jackets and looking entirely unbothered by the cold. "You look like hell," Frank said by way of greeting, stepping inside without waiting. Tom managed a weak smile. "Merry Christmas to you too." Frank studied him, eyes narrowing. "Something happened last night." Tom shrugged, but it was a hollow gesture. "Just family stuff." Frank snorted. "Yeah, I heard you left early. People talk. And you look like someone kicked your dog, so try again." Tom hesitated, then sighed. "Jason, well, things were tense." Frank leaned back in the kitchen chair, crossing his arms. "Tense? Or did he pull something stupid?" Tom didn't answer. He didn't have to. Frank's expression hardened. "You're letting them use you, buddy. Worse, letting them treat you like you don't matter." Tom flinched, not because the words were harsh, but because they landed too close to the truth. After Frank left, the house felt heavier than before. Tom stood by the window, watching the snow thicken on the street outside. He'd spent years telling himself Jason's distance was temporary, stress, marriage pressures, life. But now, with the memory of that shove still burning on his chest, he wondered how long he'd been an outsider and how long he'd ignored the signs. The realization settled over him slowly, cold as the winter outside. Something was breaking, had been breaking for a long time, and Tom finally felt the fracture. The snow hadn't stopped. It came down in thin, steady lines that blurred the edges of the street outside Tom's living room window, turning the world into a hazy white curtain. He stood there with his mug of reheated coffee, cold now, untouched, and tried to focus on anything except the memory of Jason's hand on his chest. But memories didn't obey commands. They rose when they wanted, and today they rose fast. He remembered another winter, 10 years earlier, when Jason came to him shaking with worry. A business loan had fallen through, and the bank refused to trust a man his age with such a new venture. Tom had been sitting at this very kitchen table when Jason said, "Dad, I need your name on this, just until things stabilize. Please." Tom didn't hesitate back then. He'd driven straight to the bank with his son, signed the papers, and put his own financial future on the line without blinking. A father helps his children. That's what he believed. That's how he was raised. But now, standing in the dim light of his living room, he felt the weight of that signature like a chain around his ankles. A chain he'd placed on himself. His phone buzzed on the table. He looked at the screen. Another call from Sarah checking on him, and let it ring out. He wasn't ready to explain what happened. Not because he was ashamed of Jason, but because he was ashamed of himself. Across town, in a house decorated in the Pierce's style more than Jason's, conversations were happening without him. Conversations he could feel but not hear. He imagined Lindsay in their bright, spotless kitchen, leaning against the counter with that dismissive tilt to her head. "Jason, honestly, your dad just drags our image down. I know he's family, but he doesn't fit the life we're building. You can't keep running to him for everything." Those words had been muttered before, in variations he'd overheard at parties, in tones dripping polite condescension. But now, with the distance growing between him and Jason, Tom couldn't ignore the possibility that they'd taken root. Because somewhere in the last few months, Jason's calls had grown less frequent, then shorter. Then he'd stopped picking up altogether. Texts went hours or days without answers. And Tom, ever patient, ever hopeful, kept giving grace he never received in return. The phone rang again, louder this time. Sarah, persistent as always. He finally answered, "Hey, sweetheart. Dad, I got off early. I'm coming over." Sarah. But she'd already hung up. 20 minutes later, she walked into the living room still in her scrubs, hair pulled back in a messy bun, cheeks flushed from the cold. One look at him and she froze. "Tell me everything," she demanded. Tom tried to brush it off. "It was nothing." "Dad," her voice cracked, hurt, anger, and frustration all tangled together. "Jason shoved you at Christmas, and you came home alone." He sank into the armchair and rubbed his forehead. "It wasn't a shove, exactly, just him moving me." "Dad." The word cut like a blade. He sighed deeply. "Yes, it happened." Sarah paced the room, hands trembling. "I swear Lindsay has poisoned him. She wants Jason to look like he's part of the Pierce elite society or whatever nonsense they pretend to belong to. And you," she stopped, eyes hardening. "You keep giving them things, money, support, favors, and they treat you like this." He looked away. The shame crept up his neck. Sarah narrowed her eyes. "Dad, what else are you not telling me?" Tom hesitated. Silence stretched. Finally, in a quiet voice, he admitted, "I covered part of Jason's mortgage last year, just a few payments. He was behind. I didn't want him and Lindsay fighting." Sarah stared at him, horrified. "Dad." He tried to explain. "It was nothing. He said it was temporary." "No," she said firmly. "This isn't generosity anymore, it's enabling. They know you'll always step in. That's why they don't respect you, because they don't have to." Her words echoed in the room like a cold draft. Then she added, softer but sharper than anything she'd said before, "They'll cut you out the moment you stop paying." The sentence hit him harder than Jason's shove. Because deep down, in the quiet place he didn't like to acknowledge, Tom already feared she might be right. He stared out the window again, watching the lines in the snow blur as the wind shifted, and for the first time, he wondered just how long he'd been disappearing from his own son's life, and why he'd let it happen. By January, the holiday. Why lights had come down across the neighborhood, but the chill between Tom and Jason hadn't budged. If anything, it had settled into something colder, more structured, like ice that had formed overnight and wasn't going anywhere. Jason didn't call to talk. He didn't check in. He didn't mention Christmas, or the shove, or the look on his father's face. The only time Tom's phone lit up with his son's name was when Jason needed documents for his business. Bank forms, cosign paperwork, tax information Tom still had access to because of the loan. Every call sounded the same, rushed, transactional, lacking even the barest attempt at warmth. "Dad, I need a copy of the 2019 statement." "Dad, can you send over the signed addendum?" "Dad, the lender needs verification of your income from when you retired." No questions about how Tom was doing. No thanks, not even a hi before the requests began. Tom always provided what Jason needed quietly, efficiently, but each time he clicked send, a small piece of him chipped away. The distance had become mechanical and intentional. He suspected Lindsay had a hand in it. Her voice was always a shadow behind Jason's decisions, a whisper that lingered in the background of phone calls. One night, Jason forgot to mute the phone when he turned to her. Tom heard her clearly. "Why don't you ask my dad instead? He actually knows what he's doing. Your father means well, but he's outdated." Jason didn't defend him. He didn't even pause. The call ended with a clipped "Thanks, Dad," followed by silence that rang louder than anything else. A week later, Tom heard from a neighbor that Edward Pierce was mentoring Jason now, offering business guidance, introducing him to connections in the real estate world. And while Jason was enamored by the idea of impressing a man like Edward, Tom knew something was off. Deals that looked too shiny usually hid teeth. He'd spent a lifetime in home building. He recognized the smell of danger even from a distance. Then came the community fundraiser at the local church, an event Tom always attended, a quiet place to volunteer to feel useful. He arrived early, helped set up tables, arranged coats, and smiled politely at the volunteers. As he stepped into the hallway near the dining room, he heard voices around the corner, familiar ones. Edward Pierce and Marilyn. "You really think Jason's ready to partner on a deal that size?" Marilyn asked, her tone feathered with passive concern. Edward chuckled, low and dismissive. "He's eager, easy to influence, and he listens, unlike his father." Tom froze. Edward continued, "Tom Beckett is all heart and no strategy. Salt-of-the-earth type, sure, but not someone you want in your financial orbit. I told Jason that. Lindsay agrees." Marilyn sighed sympathetically, fake sympathy, the kind that stings worse than open hostility. "Why is Tom still involved in their financial life anyway? It's messy." "Because Jason can't fully sever him yet," Edward said. "Not until the paperwork shifts over. But trust me, once this next phase moves forward, Tom won't be needed at all." Tom's fingers tightened around the bundle of folded tablecloths he was carrying. He felt heat spread in his chest, slow, thick, dangerous. The kind of heat that didn't explode outward but simmered deep, ready to change shape. He didn't confront them, didn't clear his throat, didn't announce his presence. He simply stepped backward, turned into the kitchen, and kept arranging tablecloths as though the words hadn't hit him like a hammer. But he knew something had shifted inside him. Perhaps it had been building since Christmas, perhaps longer. But right then, standing under the fluorescent lights of a church basement, listening to the pretense and arrogance of people who had inserted themselves into his son's life, Tom felt the beginnings of a line forming. A line drawn quietly, firmly, in the snow of his own patience. That night he sat at his kitchen table long after the house had gone still. He spread out years' worth of documents, loan forms, business agreements, mortgage receipts. The papers that tied him to Jason's financial world. Papers that gave him responsibilities and power. He didn't know what he wanted to do yet, but he knew he needed to understand his position and his vulnerability. The next morning, he dialed the number Sarah had given him months ago, one he'd kept tucked in a drawer because he never wanted to use it. "Attorney Rachel Colton," a calm voice answered. Tom hesitated for only a moment. "Hi, my name's Tom Beckett. I'd like to set up a consultation, just to understand my options." It wasn't revenge, not yet. But it was the first step toward something he could feel coming. Something sharp, inevitable, and long overdue. Rachel Colton's office sat on the second floor of a modest brick building overlooking the town square, its windows fogged slightly from the winter chill. Tom arrived early, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, the file of documents tucked neatly under his arm. He wasn't sure what he expected to hear. Maybe confirmation that he was still tied to Jason's business loan. Maybe reassurance that withdrawing wouldn't cause chaos. What he didn't expect was a revelation that would shift the ground under him. Rachel welcomed him with a steady handshake and a warm, practiced smile. She was calm in a way that made people feel braver than they were. Tom needed that today. He needed someone who could look at the truth without flinching. "Let's take a look at what you brought," she said gently. Tom handed her the folder and sat across from her, shoulders tight. Rachel put on her glasses and flipped through the documents, the loan forms, the mortgage agreements, the addendums Jason had asked him to sign over the years. She read quietly at first, her brow tightening gradually until she let out a soft, surprised breath. "Mr. Beckett," she said carefully, "did you know you own 51% of your son's house?" Tom blinked, thinking he misheard. "I what?" Rachel turned the papers toward him, tapping the signature lines. "Because you co-signed the loan, and because your credit and financial stability were stronger than Jason's at the time, the lender structured the ownership proportionally. Legally speaking, you're the majority owner." A slow, heavy silence settled over the room. Tom stared at the paperwork, feeling the truth crack open inside him. Jason had never mentioned this. Not once in all the years he'd lived in that house. Not once in all the arguments about finances. Not even when the Pierces made snide comments about Tom being involved. Jason knew. Lindsay did not. And the Pierces clearly had no idea. The realization hit him with a force he hadn't felt in years. Jason had kept this hidden, deliberately, strategically, maybe to avoid conflict with Lindsay, maybe to avoid looking dependent in front of her family. But whatever the reason, Tom suddenly saw the dynamic for what it was. He wasn't just the outsider in their family narrative. He was the invisible backbone, the one whose name kept the house standing. Rachel continued, her tone turning more serious. I need you to understand, if Jason is entering into business agreements with Edward Pierce, especially real estate related, you are exposed. Any deal involving that house could put your assets at risk. Tom's pulse quickened. What kind of risk? Financial liability, she said plainly. If Pierce is involved, you need to be extremely cautious. Tom nodded slowly. He felt uneasy about Pierce's influence, but hearing a lawyer confirm that feeling twisted something deep in his gut. Then Rachel added, almost as an afterthought, by the way, Detective Erin Matson left a message for you. She said it's regarding a background inquiry involving Edward Pierce. She asked if you could return her call. Tom frowned. A detective? Rachel slid her phone across the desk so he could read the number. She's with financial crimes. Good reputation. If she's reaching out, it's important. The air in the office felt suddenly heavier. Tom stepped outside onto the landing, dialing the number with stiff fingers. The wind cut through his coat, but he barely felt it. Detective Matson answered with brisk professionalism. Mr. Beckett, thank you for returning my call. I'm following up on an inquiry you submitted about Edward Pierce's involvement in a pending real estate deal. I didn't submit anything, Tom said. Well, Matson replied, your name appears on documents tied to a property that Pierce has been interested in. That puts you in the notification chain. Tom steadied himself. What's going on? Mr. Pierce is under investigation for potential property fraud, she said. There are red flags in multiple deals. We can't disclose everything, but we suggest that anyone considering business with him exercise extreme caution. Property fraud. Jason. The house. His signature. Everything collided in Tom's mind. After hanging up, he didn't move for a long moment. Snowflakes drifted past him in slow spirals, catching in his hair, melting against his coat. He stared out over the town square, watching people go about their day unaware of the storm rising in his life. He saw it clearly now. The way Pierce had circled Jason like a shark sensing blood, the way Lindsay encouraged the distance, the way Jason leaned on Pierce more with each passing month. And he saw the danger, not emotional danger, not family drama, something bigger, something that could take the house, the business, the stability he had worked his entire life to protect. Jason wasn't just pushing him aside. He was walking blindfolded toward disaster. And Tom was tethered to him. For the first time in years, Tom felt something shift inside him. Not grief, not disappointment, resolve. He tightened his scarf, straightened his back, and whispered the words that settled like steel in his chest. I'm done being pushed aside. And this time he meant it. The call came 2 days after Tom's meeting with Rachel, just as he was sorting through old boxes in the attic, pulling out every document tied to Jason's mortgage and business loan. His phone buzzed against a wooden beam, and Jason's name flashed across the screen. Tom stared at it for a long moment before answering. Dad, hey, Jason said quickly, breathless like he'd been rehearsing. I need you to sign something, just a quick form, nothing big. Can you do it today? There it was, no greeting, no question about how Tom was doing, just another request, another assumption that Tom would comply. What kind of form? Tom asked, keeping his voice even. Jason hesitated. It's for the lender, just routine stuff. I'll send it over. Can you sign it and send it back? Routine. Tom had learned that routine meant, I don't want you to look too closely." He exhaled slowly. "No." Silence, sharp, stunned, cut through the line. "What do you mean, no?" "I'm not signing anything," Tom said, steady as steel. "Not until we talk." Jason let out a confused laugh. "Dad, what's going on? You always help with this stuff." "Not anymore." This time the silence stretched longer. Then Lindsay's voice surfaced faintly in the background, cold, clipped, unmistakable. "What's he saying? Put it on speaker." A beep. Then Lindsay's voice sharpened into the call. "Tom, I really don't understand this behavior. That paperwork is important. Are you trying to sabotage our future?" Sabotage. The word nearly made Tom laugh. They had no idea how close he'd come to being dragged down with them. "I'm not sabotaging anything," Tom replied, his tone still calm. "But we need to talk in person." "We don't have time for," Lindsay began. "In person," Tom repeated. And for the first time, he didn't sound like the man who folded himself small to keep the peace. He sounded like someone who'd finally found the edges of his own patience. Jason's voice came back on the line, quieter. "Fine, I'll come over." The call ended. Tom stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the shift settle in. There was no going back now, not to the quiet compliance, not to the unspoken expectations. Things were changing. He was changing. When the doorbell rang an hour later, Jason stood on Tom's porch with his jaw already tight, shoulders pulled back like a man walking into an argument he planned to win. "Dad," he said, stepping inside without waiting to be invited, "what's with the dramatic in-person talk stuff? You're freaking Lindsay out." Tom folded his arms. "This isn't about Lindsay." Jason scoffed. "Everything affects her, Dad. Everything we do, every delay." "Jazz." "On," Tom said quietly. "I'm not signing anything until I understand exactly what it is." Jason's irritation sharpened. "Why are you suddenly being difficult? It's paperwork, just a formality." Tom held his gaze. "Does Edward know about it?" Jason blinked, thrown off balance. "What does that have to do with anything?" Tom didn't look away. "Does he?" Jason's throat tightened. He suggested we move things along, yeah. But Dad, he's been helping me, guiding me. He knows how this stuff works." Tom let out a slow breath. "I know more than you think, Jason." The room seemed to still. Jason stared at him, confusion flickering into something nervous, like a child caught lying but unsure how much the parent already knew. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jason asked, voice low. Tom didn't answer directly. Instead, he stepped toward the dining table where he'd laid out the documents, loan agreements, mortgage forms, ownership papers neatly arranged in rows. Jason followed him, eyes widening as he recognized the stack. "You've been going through everything?" Jason asked. "Just catching up," Tom said. "Understanding where things stand, understanding what's at risk." Jason's brow furrowed. "Risk? What risk?" Tom didn't clarify. He didn't mention Rachel's warning. He didn't mention the detective or the investigation or the fact that he technically owned more of Jason's house than Jason himself. He simply let the weight of the unknown hang between them. "Dad," Jason said quietly, "you're scaring me a little." Tom met his gaze. "Good, because you should start paying attention." Jason looked down at the documents again, uneasy, unsure. He'd always seen Tom as the steady, pliable figure in the background, a man who would bend before he ever pushed back. This version of Tom rattled him. After Jason left, Tom returned to the table and continued sorting through the paperwork. He organized every contract, every letter from the bank, every tax record. He made copies. He made notes. Each page he touched felt like another small piece of control returning to him. Control he hadn't realized he'd given away. Outside, the wind pushed snow against the window in soft bursts, like fingers tapping, urging him forward. Tom gathered another stack of papers, his jaw set, his movements deliberate. He didn't know exactly how the next chapter would unfold, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was preparing, and this time he wouldn't be pushed aside. The tension inside Jason and Lindsay's house spread like a hairline fracture, small at first, almost invisible but widening a little more every day. Tom could feel it even from miles away. Jason's voice had changed, shortening, tightening, like someone pulling a rope that was about to snap. Lindsay's influence had always been present, but now it felt weaponized. Tom heard about it indirectly at first. A neighbor mentioned seeing Jason arguing with Lindsay in their driveway late at night. Another said Lindsay had stormed out of a dinner party, furious about loyalties. Tom tried to stay out of it, but stress has a way of finding the people who least deserve it. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday evening. Tom had just settled into his recliner, a cup of tea steaming beside him when his phone rang. Jason. He hesitated before answering, "Hey, son." Jason didn't bother with greetings. His tone was sharp, frayed at the edges. "Dad, why are you being like this? Lindsay says you're trying to make me look incompetent in front of her parents." Tom closed his eyes. "Jason, I haven't done anything to embarrass you. I've only asked to understand what you're involving me in." "You refuse to sign the papers," Jason snapped. "Edward thinks you're being paranoid. Lindsay says you're acting out of spite." Spite, the word stunned Tom for a moment. After everything, after paying the mortgage, covering emergencies, holding Jason's life together silently for years, he was being painted as the problem. "Jason," Tom said softly, "I'm protecting myself. And whether you see it or not, I'm protecting you too." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "No, you're causing problems. You're making Lindsay choose sides." Tom's stomach tightened. "Choose sides, Jason, this isn't a war." "It feels like one," Jason shot back. "You're forcing me into a position. I'm exhausted, Dad. I can't keep playing mediator between you and Lindsay." Tom's voice dropped. "I've never asked you to." But Jason wasn't listening. Stress and fear had wrapped around his words like barbed wire. "Look, maybe it's better if you just stay out of things for a while." Before Tom could respond, another voice entered the line. "Sarah." "Jason, stop." Her tone was firm, protective, and filled with a heat Tom hadn't heard since she was a teenager defending her brother from bullies. "You don't get to talk to Dad like that." Jason stammered. "Sarah, why are you?" "You called him to pick a fight," she said. "You think I don't know what's happening. Lindsay's manipulating you. Dad asked for clarity. That's not sabotage. That's common sense." "Sarah, you don't understand." "No," she cut in. "You don't understand. You pushed Dad away, and now Lindsay's punishing you for trying to fix your own mess. And instead of dealing with it, you're taking it out on the one person who's belayed you out your whole life." Jason went silent. Tom could almost hear his son shrinking, folding inward, the way people do when the truth hits too close. Sarah's voice softened. "Jason, you crossed a line. Call back when you're ready to treat Dad like your father, not an obstacle." She hung up. The line went dead, leaving Tom in a quiet house that suddenly felt even quieter. He set the phone down and leaned back in his chair. His chest felt heavy, not with anger but with realization. He had been so focused on his own relationship with Jason that he hadn't stopped to notice the deeper issue. Jason's marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a hierarchy, and Lindsay was at the top. The next morning, the truth became undeniable. Jason texted, "Lindsay doesn't want me coming over anymore. Says it's making things harder. I need to respect that." Tom stared at the message for a long time, so it was official. Lindsay was drawing the lines now, deciding who Jason could see, deciding how much space Tom was allowed in his own son's life. Something inside Tom broke, not violently but quietly, like ice cracking under a slow, steady pressure. He finally acknowledged what he had avoided for years. He had been emotionally blackmailed, guilt-tripped, and minimized in his own family. And every time he stepped back to keep the peace, the distance grew. He stood up, walked to the kitchen table, and pulled the stack of documents toward him again. Ownership papers, loan agreements, tax forms, evidence of every sacrifice he'd made. For the first time, he looked at them not with guilt, not with hesitation, but with clarity. He had something worth protecting. And he finally accepted that he was the only one willing to protect it. The morning light slipped into the room, illuminating the papers spread before him. Tom reached for a fresh folder, his movements deliberate, controlled. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was preparing. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the hurt and disappointment, a steely resolve began to form, quiet but unshakable. A shift had begun. And this time, he wasn't bending for anyone. The sky outside Rachel Colton's office was a flat, winter gray when Tom returned, the kind that made the whole world feel suspended. He hadn't planned on coming back so soon, but something in him, call it instinct, call it self-preservation, told him he needed to understand more than just ownership paperwork. He needed to understand how deeply he was exposed, and how easily someone could take advantage of him if he stayed passive. Rachel motioned for him to sit, her expression thoughtful, almost gentle. "Tom, I've been reviewing your documents," she said, folding her hands. "You've tied a lot of your assets to Jason over the years, more than most parents would. It's put you in a vulnerable position." Tom let out a long breath. "I just wanted to help him. I never thought about consequences." "That's exactly why we need to talk about your estate," Rachel replied. "Because you have more to protect than you realize. And right now, your assets aren't shielded. If Jason makes a mistake, or if someone influences him into one, you could lose far more than a house share." The words hit him harder than expected. He'd always seen himself as simple, modest home, modest savings. But to Lindsay's family, to people like Edward Pierce, money wasn't sentimental. It was leverage. "So what should I do?" he asked quietly. Rachel leaned forward. "You need to restructure your estate, tighten control, shift certain funds away from being entangled with Jason's liabilities, transfer some assets elsewhere to a safer beneficiary." Tom blinked. "Sarah?" Rachel nodded. "She's financially stable, independent, and not intertwined with Jason's marital issues. Moving some of your savings or investments to her would protect you, and frankly, protect your legacy." The decision wasn't easy. It felt like choosing between his children. But for the first time, he saw the difference between love and dependency. Only one of them respected him enough to see the truth. By the next week, the transfers were underway, small at first, then more substantial. Tom made quiet trips to the bank, filled out forms with careful handwriting, and started peeling back the layers of vulnerability he didn't realize he'd built for himself. He didn't broadcast it, he didn't threaten Jason, he simply acted. But secrets rarely stay hidden in families like Lindsay's. 3 days later, Tom's phone rang, Jason's name lighting the screen in frantic pulses. Tom answered. "Dad, what's going on?" Jason's voice was sharp with panic. "Why are you moving money around? I checked an account." "And did you transfer things to Sarah? Are you cutting me off?" Tom closed his eyes. "Jason, this isn't about cutting anyone off. It's about securing my estate." Jason scoffed. "Estate? Seriously? Dad, you're acting crazy. You're overreacting to nothing." Before Tom could reply, another voice surged into the background, sharp, furious, unmistakably Lindsay. "This is retaliation," she snapped. "He's punishing us because we called him out at Christmas. This is emotional blackmail." Tom's grip tightened on the phone. Emotional blackmail. The irony was almost unbearable. Lindsay grabbed the phone. "Tom, this is financial manipulation and it's not okay. You can't just change things behind our backs." Tom felt something cold and clear settle inside him. "It's my money, my choice." "That money affects our future," Lindsay shot back. "That's exactly the problem," Tom said quietly. Lindsay made a frustrated sound and passed the phone back to Jason. Jason's voice came back shaky. "Dad, why are you doing this now? It feels like you're abandoning me." Tom swallowed hard. "Jason, I've supported you for years, more than you know, but I can't keep exposing myself financially. I need to make responsible choices." Jason said nothing. The silence was louder than any argument. Then he hung up. Tom stared at the phone for a long moment, feeling something break. Not cleanly but slowly, like a rope fraying strand by strand. 2 hours later, the second wave hit. Edward Pierce called. Tom didn't answer. The voicemail came through anyway. Edward's voice was smooth, patronizing. "Tom, I hear you're making changes. Probably not wise at your age. Money requires modern thinking. You're too old-fashioned to trust with complicated decisions. Jason needs forward-looking support. Don't make this harder on him." Tom listened to the message twice. Each word sharpened his resolve. The next day, Marilyn sent a text dripping with passive aggression. "We heard you're reorganizing things. Is everything all right? This seems unlike you." Tom didn't respond. He didn't need to. He simply observed, from a distance, as the Pierce influence twisted Jason into more anxiety, more fear, more dependence on people who wanted control, not family. And through the noise, Tom saw something crystal clear. Anger wasn't going to win. Anger wasn't enough. If he wanted to protect himself, and maybe even protect Jason from being destroyed, he needed strategy. He needed clarity. He needed to think several steps ahead of the Pierces, ahead of Lindsay, ahead of Jason's desperation. That night, Tom sat at his table under the warm kitchen light, sorting documents into new folders. Legal notes, ownership records, bank statements, evidence. He wasn't planning revenge. Not yet. He was preparing for a war he hadn't wanted, but one he now understood he could no longer avoid. The knock on Tom's front door wasn't just loud, it was frantic, sharp, desperate, the kind of knock a man makes when everything around him is cracking and he's trying to keep at least one thing from falling apart. Tom set down the folder he'd been organizing, another stack of documents Rachel told him to keep in order, and walked to the door. The moment he opened it, Jason pushed past him, pacing into the living room like he couldn't breathe. "Dad, what are you doing?" Jason demanded, running a shaky hand through his hair. "Why didn't you tell me you were moving money? Why didn't you talk to me first?" Tom closed the door quietly. "You didn't talk to me first about a lot of things," he said. "This is no different." Jason spun, eyes wild. "This isn't the same. Lindsay's freaking out, her parents are questioning everything, and now Edward thinks you're trying to sabotage the real estate deal I'm working on." Tom let the words settle, steady and unreactive. "Jason," he said softly, "you shoved me away long before Christmas." The room went still. Completely still. Jason's face flushed, anger, shame, confusion, all fighting for space. "Dad, I didn't mean that wasn't." "You pushed me," Tom said evenly. "Not just physically, for years, every little dismissal, every time Lindsay rolled her eyes at me and you pretended not to see, every time you only called when you needed something." Jason's breath hitched. He looked like someone holding together a tower built out of wet sand. I'm under a lot of pressure," he whispered, voice trembling. "Lindsay keeps saying I need to prioritize our family. Edward says I need to be more independent. They both think, they both say." Tom waited. Jason struggled. "They say I shouldn't rely on you anymore," Jason finally admitted, eyes falling to the floor. "That you hold me back." There it was, spoken out loud at last. Tom felt the sting sharp, clean, but he didn't flinch. "I never asked you to rely on me," he said. "I only stepped in when you asked, when you needed help, when you were drowning." Jason's voice cracked. "And now you're cutting me off when everything is falling apart." Biff. Or Tom could answer. The front door opened again. Sarah walked in, her hospital badge still clipped to her scrubs, hair pulled back in a messy bun. She didn't even look surprised to find Jason there. She'd likely seen his car and knew exactly what she'd walk into. "What's going on?" she asked sharply. Jason turned toward her, relief washing over his face. "Sarah, good. You need to talk to Dad. He's doing all these financial moves and it's messing up everything on my end. Lindsay thinks." "No," Sarah interrupted, stepping forward. "We're not doing the Lindsay thinks routine today." Jason blinked at her, thrown. She crossed her arms, shoulders squared like she'd been preparing for this confrontation for years. "You came here to demand explanations. After everything you've put Dad through. Jason, you haven't been a son to him. You've been a dependent who refuses to admit he's drowning." "That's not fair," Jason whispered. "Oh, it's fair," Sarah said. "Dad stood by you when you couldn't afford the business loan. He helped with the mortgage. He covered emergencies you didn't tell your wife about. And how did you repay him? By letting your father-in-law talk about him like he's trash. By letting Lindsay dictate who you can and can't see." Jason shook his head, voice small. "I feel torn, okay? I'm trying to keep my marriage together and keep things good with Dad and manage the business, and Sarah pressed. "And I don't know how to make everyone happy," Jason admitted, his voice cracking under the pressure. "I feel like I'm failing no matter what I do." Tom looked at his son, the slumped shoulders, the exhaustion, the fear, and for the first time he saw the truth with painful clarity. Jason wasn't choosing the Pierces because he believed in them. He was choosing them because he was afraid to stand up to them, afraid to confront Lindsay, afraid to tell Edward no. And Tom finally understood. He couldn't save a man who refused to save himself. Tom stepped closer, speaking gently but firmly. "Jason, I can't carry your consequences anymore. I can't protect you from the people you won't protect yourself from." Jason's eyes flicked up desperate. "Dad, don't shut me out." "I'm not shutting you out," Tom said, "but I am stepping back. You need to stand on your own feet, not on my name, not on my savings, not on my silence." Jason's breath shook. "And what if everything falls apart?" Tom held his gaze. "Then it falls, and you rebuild it without letting other people decide who you are." Jason didn't respond. His jaw tightened and he paced toward the door, torn between anger and heartbreak. Sarah watched him go, then exhaled shakily. "Dad, this is going to get worse before it gets better." Tom nodded. "I know." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Not literal, but the kind of storm you could feel in your bones before it broke. Legal trouble brewing. Emotional fallout tightening. Decisions looming like dark clouds over all of them. Tom looked down at the stack of folders on his table and felt the weight of what was coming. A storm was building. And this time, he wasn't the one who would get swept away. The morning began quietly, too quietly. A thin sheet of frost clung to Tom's windows, the air brittle enough to sting his lungs when he stepped outside to collect the mail. He was halfway back up the porch steps when his phone buzzed. Detective Aaron Matson. He answered cautiously, "Detective." Her voice was clipped, urgent. "Mr. Beckett, I wanted to reach you sooner, but things moved fast overnight. I need to update you about Edward Pierce." Tom's stomach tensed. "What about him?" There was a brief pause, one of those pauses that lets a man know his life is about to tilt. "Pierce is officially tied to an ongoing fraudulent investment ring," she said. "Real estate, shell companies, fake renovation funds. The whole network is under investigation. We also discovered he's been pulling investors in through personal connections. People like your son." The words struck like a blow. "Jason," Tom whispered, "he's involved." "His pending deal with Pierce is flagged as potentially fraudulent," Matson confirmed. "He's not a suspect yet, but if he signs anything, even unknowingly, he could be held liable." The porch suddenly felt colder. Tom gripped the railing to steady himself. "Detective, what exactly does that mean for him?" "It means," she said carefully, that your son is one signature away from being trapped inside a criminal investigation. Tom's breath left him in a long, unsteady exhale. Jason wasn't just being manipulated. He was walking straight into legal quicksand, and he didn't even know it. "Thank you for telling me," Tom murmured. "Be careful with Pierce," Matson warned. "He's cornered right now. Cornered people get reckless." When the call ended, Tom didn't go inside. He just stood there as the wind cut across the porch, numbing his fingers. He could feel it, something accelerating. The beginning of collapse. And ND Jason was standing directly in the fallout zone. That evening, Tom's phone rang again. Jason this time. His voice was frantic. "Dad, I'm at the office with Edward. We're finalizing the real estate partnership. I need your signature on something, just routine verification of your co-ownership on the house." Tom froze. "Jason, do not sign anything Pierce puts in front of you." Jason sighed deeply. "Dad, not this again." But in the background, Tom heard movement, papers shuffling, murmuring voices. And then Edward's smooth, syrupy tone. "Jason, don't let him guilt you. This is a smart move. You need to show confidence." Then Lindsay's voice, sharper, impatient. "Stop letting your father ruin every opportunity. Just finish the deal. God, Jason, grow up." Tom felt his pulse rise. "Jason," he said firmly, "listen to me. That deal is under investigation. You sign anything tonight and you could be implicated. I'm telling you the truth." Jason groaned. "You don't know that, Dad. You've been filling your head with paranoia because Lindsay's parents don't worship you. Please stop." "I spoke to a detective," Tom said. "Jason, I have proof." But Jason wasn't listening. He was drowning in Pierce's pressure and Lindsay's expectations. "Dad, if you won't help, at least stop trying to sabotage this. I'm tired of being stuck between everyone." Tom opened his mouth to respond. But then the call cut abruptly. He didn't think, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his coat and keys and drove. The Pierce Realty office glowed through the glass windows like a stage set, too polished, too still. Tom pushed through the door and found Jason seated at a long conference table. Edward stood behind him, leaning over his shoulder, guiding his hand toward a thick contract. Lindsay perched nearby, arms crossed, tapping her nails against the desk with irritation. Jason was inches from signing. "Stop it." Tom's voice cracked through the room like a whip. Jason turned, startled. Lindsay scowled. Edward's smile didn't break, but something in his eyes flickered, a flash of annoyance, maybe fear. "Dad, what are you?" Tom stepped forward. "You're not signing that." Lindsay shot up. "You don't get to walk in here and ruin this." Jason's hands shook. "Dad, I'm doing this for my future, for my family." "No," Tom said. "You're doing this because you're being manipulated." Edward scoffed. "Tom, you don't understand business. This is a legitimate deal. The police think otherwise." "That did it." Edward stiffened. Only for a second, but long enough for Tom to see he'd hit the center of the target. Jason blinked. "Police." Tom held his son's gaze. "Detective Matson called me. Pierce is under investigation. This deal is dirty, Jason." Lindsay gasped, shaking her head. "Don't listen to him. He's lying to scare you." "I have documents," Tom said, pulling out a folder from his coat. "Dozens of them." Jason stared at the folder as if it were a ticking bomb. His hand hovered over the pen. And then, rage. "Dad, stop!" Jason shouted, slamming his fist onto the table. "Just stop interfering. Stop acting like you know everything. Why can't you let me handle my own life?" The room rang with his voice. Jason's breathing was ragged, eyes blazing. The anger wasn't really at Tom. It was fear, pressure, humiliation, all twisted into a single outburst. He had no idea Tom had just saved him from criminal liability. He had no idea the signature he was about to give would have pulled him into Pierce's fraud ring. He had no idea Tom had thrown himself between him and disaster. Tom's voice stayed soft. "You'll understand soon." Jason didn't respond. He just stared at the contract, breathing hard, shoulders trembling. Edward stepped forward, attempting to regain control. "Jason, we can finish this later. No need to rush." But Tom saw something in Edward's face now, fear masked behind charm. A predator caught in the light. Tom stepped back, watching the pieces shift. The tension coiled tighter, the truth inch closer to breaking open. The deal was cracking. Jason was cracking. And the web Pierce spun so carefully was beginning to unravel. The next 48 hours moved like a storm rolling downhill, slow at first, then unstoppable. Jason's world, which he had tried to keep stitched together with charm and denial, began tearing apart at the seams. Detectives arrived at Pierce Realty early in the morning. Tom wasn't there, but he heard about it within hours. Word traveled fast in a town this size. Jason had been brought in for questioning, not as a suspect but as a potential participant in Edward Pierce's investment opportunities. They wanted to know what he'd signed, what he'd been promised, and how deep he was in. Tom sat in his kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold, imagining his son in that sterile interview room, fidgeting, defensive, terrified. By noon, Jason showed up at Tom's house. Not to apologize, not to understand, but to deflect. He stormed. Dee through the door, hair disheveled, face flushed. "Dad, what did you do?" he snapped. "The detectives dragged me in like some criminal. They said someone tipped them off." Tom looked up slowly. "I didn't tip anyone off. They were already investigating." Jason scoffed. "Yeah, because you've been stirring things up. You talked to that detective, didn't you? You filled their heads with suspicions." Tom set the cup down. "Jason, you are involved with a man under active criminal investigation. That has nothing to do with me." Jason paced the living room, hands shaking. "I told them I wasn't responsible for any of it, that you kept interfering, confusing things, making it look suspicious. I said you." He stopped. He realized what he'd said. He had tried to blame his own father to escape scrutiny. A long silence filled the room. Tom's voice, when it came, wasn't angry. It wasn't even disappointed. It was quiet, devastatingly quiet. "Jason, you still don't understand what you were walking into." Jason rubbed his face. "Dad, I'm scared. Lindsay is furious. Edward won't answer my calls, and the detectives kept asking if I signed anything, if I benefited. They kept bringing up the house paperwork, the money, the partnership." "You almost lost everything," Tom said. Jason whipped around. "Because you wouldn't sign." The accusation hung there like a slap. Before Tom could respond, Sarah stepped through the doorway. She didn't bother hiding the disgust on her face. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Jason stiffened. "Sarah." "No," she said sharply. "You tried to blame Dad to the detectives. After he saved you from signing fraudulent documents, you have some nerve." Jason swallowed hard. I panicked." "That's not panic," Sarah said. "That's cowardice." Jason's shoulders slumped, but Sarah didn't relent. "All Dad has ever done is protect you, even when you didn't deserve it." Jason's voice cracked. "I didn't know what else to say. Lindsay, she said I needed to defend our family. She told me Dad was trying to undermine everything we built." Sarah stared at him, expression softening only slightly. "And you believed her?" Jason looked away. "I don't know what to believe anymore." It was the closest thing to honesty he'd shown in weeks, but it wasn't enough. It didn't undo the damage. As the siblings stood there, one broken, one furious, Tom watched Jason crumble piece by piece. And he watched something else too, distance. Not between Jason and Tom, between Jason and Lindsay. Jason whispered, almost in confession, "She hasn't spoken to me since the detectives called. She doesn't want anything to do with the investigation. She said she needs space." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. Of course she does. Now that things aren't shiny anymore, she's out. Jason didn't deny it. His silence was answer enough. Later that afternoon, Rachel Colton stopped by Tom's house. She had already heard about the questioning. Legal circles in town were buzzing. "Tom," she said gently as they sat at his dining table, "you need to brace yourself. People like the Pierces don't go down quietly. There may be backlash, accusations, pressure, spin. Jason might get caught in it, and by extension, they may come after you." Tom nodded slowly. "I figured." "And legally," Rachel continued, "your position is strong, but emotionally, these next steps may be harder than anything so far." Tom looked at the pile of documents on the table, ownership papers, loan forms, notes from the detective. Symbols of years of sacrifice twisted into leverage he never wanted, but now needed to use wisely. He exhaled deeply, a long breath that carried exhaustion, grief, but also clarity. "I think," he said, "it's time for a decisive step." Rachel studied him for a moment and nodded. "Then I'll be ready when you are." As evening settled in, the house grew quiet again. Jason had left, uncertain, shaken, afraid. Sarah stayed a little longer, then hugged Tom tightly before heading home. When the door finally clicked shut and Tom stood alone in the dim living room, he felt it, the final break in the line. Jason was drowning in consequences. The Pierces were circling. The investigation was escalating. And Tom knew the next phase wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about action. The storm wasn't coming. It had arrived. The fallout didn't hit all at once. It came in waves, quiet at first, then mounting, then impossible to ignore. By late February, Jason's business, once bustling with new clients and hopeful plans, felt like a house whose foundation was quietly eroding beneath it. The investigation surrounding Pierce spread through the local business community like a cold draft under every doorway. Rumors circulated. Partners backed out. Potential clients stopped returning calls. Even long-time customers, the ones who had trusted Jason since his first contract, hesitated to stay connected to anything even remotely tied to Pierce's name. Jason tried to pretend it was temporary, just a rough patch, but denial has a short shelf life. Within 3 weeks, 2 contracts were canceled. Then a supplier froze credit terms. Then a partner delayed an important payment until the investigation settles. Jason's carefully built world, held together by confidence and Pierce's empty promises, began to buckle. And Lindsay noticed. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She simply switched off inside like someone dimming the lights in stages. Her tone cooled, her sentences shortened, her patience thinned. "Why is this happening, Jason? Why can't you get ahead of this? Why should I deal with consequences from your father's drama?" Jason tried to explain that it was Tom's doing. He tried to explain that he had nearly signed something illegal. Lindsay didn't want explanations. She wanted someone to blame, and Jason was closest. By the start of March, the distance between them wasn't distance anymore. It was a canyon. One evening, after another client backed out, Jason showed up at Tom's house. He didn't knock with anger this time. He knocked like a man holding himself together with his last bit of strength. When Tom opened the door, Jason stood there pale, exhausted, like sleep had become a stranger. "Dad," he murmured, voice cracking, "I need help." Tom hesitated but stepped aside. Jason walked in, shoulders sagging, hands shaking slightly. He looked around the living room, familiar, warm, quiet, and something in him seemed to unravel. "My accounts are drying up," Jason said. "Lindsay's furious. Clients won't touch me while the investigation's active. I just need a loan, just enough to stay afloat until things clear." Tom listened in silence, letting his son speak himself into desperation. When Jason finally stopped, eyes red and pleading, Tom spoke. Not harshly, not coldly, but with a firmness that came from knowing the truth too well. I won't fund your self-destruction, Jason. Jason blinked. Dad, please, I'm drowning. Tom swallowed. I know, and it breaks my heart. But if I bail you out now, you'll go right back to the same people, the same patterns, the same choices. So you're just going to let everything fall apart, Jason whispered. Tom's voice softened. You're building again on the edge of a cliff. I'm not stepping onto the ledge with you. Jason's jaw trembled. I'm your son. I know, Tom said quietly, and that's why I can't enable you anymore. For a long moment, Jason just stared at him, hurt, betrayed, confused, all the things Tom had felt for years. Then he turned and walked out without another word. Sarah arrived later that night, stopping by after a late shift. Tom didn't hide anything. He told her about Jason's visit, the plea for money, the guilt twisting in his chest. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Dad, you did the right thing. If you cave now, he'll never stand up on his own. This is the consequence he's been avoiding for years. Tom nodded, but the reassurance didn't ease the ache. He looked so lost, Sarah. She softened. I know, but he has to do the work. You can't do it for him. Over the next weeks, the slow decline continued. Jason stopped answering texts. When he did call, his voice was slurred, thick with alcohol. He started missing meetings, ignoring deadlines, hiding from reality instead of facing it. Neighbors mentioned seeing him leave the house late at night, stumbling slightly. Lindsay stopped going out with him altogether. She showed up to family events alone, makeup flawless, smile practiced, as if nothing in her world was crumbling behind closed doors. Jason isolated himself. The bright, eager man he once was dimmed into someone who didn't know which way was forward anymore. Tom watched all of it from afar, not because he wanted distance, but because he understood the necessity of it. Some lessons only land in the silence. Some consequences only stick when no one swoops in to cushion them. But the grief was real, heavy, quiet. Tom sat by his living room window many nights, watching the streetlights flicker, remembering Jason as a boy who used to run up the driveway waving school projects, asking for help with the glue or the paint. How had they arrived here? How had love turned into obligation, and obligation into resentment? Yet even in the grief, Tom felt clarity. A painful but necessary truth. He couldn't rescue Jason from the decline. He could only prepare for what came next. And deep inside, he sensed it. The next move would decide everything. By early spring, the air had changed, not the weather but the tone of everything around Jason. The investigation hadn't cleared, business hadn't recovered, and Lindsay's patience had evaporated completely. And with every passing week, Jason's frustration redirected itself toward the easiest target, Tom. At first it was passive-aggressive remarks during phone calls. Then it became clipped answers, sarcastic tones, and cold pauses. Eventually, it grew into something darker. One night Jason showed up at Tom's door unannounced, smelling faintly of whiskey. "You could have helped me," he snapped without greeting. "You chose not to. All of this, everything going wrong, it's because you bailed on me when things got hard." Tom stood steady. "Jason, your situation didn't fall apart because I stepped back. It fell apart because you trusted the wrong people." Jason scoffed, shaking his head. "No, you just wanted to feel powerful. You held the money over my head and then dropped it when it hurt the most." Tom didn't respond. There was no point. You can't reason with someone drowning, who insists the person on shore is the enemy. The next morning, Tom learned things had gotten worse. At the local market, two neighbors approached him cautiously, exchanging awkward looks. "Tom, we heard Lindsay's been saying you sabotaged Jason's business, that you turned the police on them and manipulated the mortgage to control their marriage." Tom stared at them, stunned. "She said what?" The neighbor winced. "She's telling people you're jealous of Edward, that you're trying to ruin Jason out of spite." "Spite? Jealousy?" Manipulation. It was astonishing how easily lies spread when people needed someone to blame. And Lindsay, always polished, always poised, knew how to wrap her distortions in just enough elegance that they sounded like concern instead of cruelty. Tom walked home with the weight of those whispers pressing on him, each step heavier than the last. By afternoon, the pressure escalated again. A thick, official-looking envelope arrived in Tom's mailbox, Pierce and Associates Legal Division. Inside were pages of accusations, vague threats, and demands for immediate clarification of ownership claims. In short, intimidation wrapped in legal jargon. Tom sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter that accused him of improper influence and obstructing contractual business opportunities. It was laughable, infuriating, predictable, but not something he could ignore. He drove straight to Rachel Colton's office. She read the letter once, then again, then leaned back with a slow exhale that sounded almost like amusement. "Edward Pierce is sloppy when cornered," she said. "This isn't a legal threat, it's a scare tactic, and a poorly constructed one." Tom rubbed his forehead. Can they actually do anything with this? Rachel shook her head. No, they're using buzzwords to intimidate you. Legally, they have nothing. She scribbled notes, drafted a response, and within an hour had dismantled every accusation in clean, precise language. "This should shut them down," she said, sealing the envelope. "And if they try anything else, we escalate. They picked the wrong person to bully." Tom nodded but didn't smile. The relief was overshadowed by something else, something quieter but sharper. The realization that Jason was still aligning himself with people who would weaponize lies against Tom. People who had no loyalty to him. People who saw him only as a tool, a liability, or a stepping stone. Later that week, Tom saw Jason at the grocery store. He was pale, thinner, and jittery. But the moment he saw Tom, his expression hardened. He walked straight past him without a word. Lindsay, a few steps behind, glared openly. Sarah heard about it and showed up at Tom's house that evening with fire in her eyes. "You are not rescuing him this time," she said, dropping onto the couch. "I know you're hurting. I know you want to fix everything. But if you step in again, he'll never learn, and he'll never stop letting the Pierces treat you like the villain." Tom nodded slowly. "I know. But knowing didn't make it easy. Knowing didn't make it hurt less." Sarah softened and reached for his hand. "Dad, what they're doing, it's abuse, manipulation, and Jason keeps choosing them, not because he's evil but because he's weak, and weakness becomes cruelty when someone else is pulling the strings." Tom stared at the window, watching dusk settle over the neighborhood. He thought about the Christmas shove, the quiet dismissals, the ignored calls, the financial dependence. The way Jason defended the Pierces even when they lied, even when they endangered him, even when they turned the town against Tom. And suddenly, he understood something he hadn't before. A truth sharp as ice. True betrayal isn't loud. It doesn't happen in one explosion. It isn't one shove, one insult, one argument. True betrayal is quiet, slow, repeated, layered in small choices that cut a person deeper every time. Jason hadn't betrayed Tom once. He had betrayed him repeatedly, consistently, almost casually. And that kind of betrayal didn't get fixed with apologies. It required something else. Something Tom was finally ready to give. Distance, protection, strategy. As night settled in, Tom gathered his documents again, the papers rustling like the beginning of a new chapter. The distance between him and Jason was widening. And this time, Tom wasn't reaching out to close it. It happened on a Thursday evening, just after sunset, when the sky was a dull bruise fading into night. Tom had been sorting paperwork at the kitchen table, more of Rachel's recommendations, more preparation for the next wave of fallout, when the front door shook violently under a series of hard, frantic knocks. Before Tom could stand, the door flew open. Jason stormed inside, face flushed, eyes bloodshot, movements jerky like someone pushed past his limit. "Dad," he barked, slamming the door behind him. "We need to talk, now." Tom stayed seated. "What's going on?" Jason paced once, twice, then stopped across from him, breathing heavily. "I need money, not a loan, money, enough to hold us over for a couple months." There it was, no build-up, no explanations, no humility, just raw demand, desperation sharpened into entitlement. Tom straightened in his chair. "No." Jason froze. "No." "No," Tom repeated calmly. "I'm not giving you money." Jason blinked rapidly as if the word had slapped him. "Dad, you have savings, I know you do. You transferred things to Sarah, you're restructuring everything. You can help me." Tom shook his head. "I can't and I won't." Jason's voice rose instantly. "You will? Are you kidding me?" Tom stayed still, unflinching. "You're asking me to fund the same choices that are destroying you." Jason slammed his palm against the table, rattling the papers. "You're destroying this family. You're the reason Lindsay's gone. She left this morning because she said she's tired of the chaos. She said you caused it." Tom felt the blow, but only for a moment. Then clarity settled back over him like armor. "Jason," he said quietly, "your wife didn't leave because F me. She left because things got hard and she needed someone to blame." Jason's eyes narrowed. "Don't talk about her like that." Tom finally stood, meeting his son eye to eye. "I'm not the villain here. I'm the only one who tried to keep you from falling into Pierce's trap." Jason scoffed. "What trap?" Tom didn't hesitate. "The fraudulent deals, the investigation, the fact that Pierce was using you to cover his own tracks." Jason froze, his breath caught in his throat. How do you know about that?" Tom stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Because Detective Matson called me weeks ago. Because she told me exactly what kind of trouble Pierce is in. And because I kept every document, every form, every signature I ever gave you. You almost signed yourself into a criminal investigation." Jason stumbled back a step, color draining from his face. "You knew." "I did. And you didn't tell me." "I tried," Tom said. "You wouldn't listen." Jason ran a shaking hand through his hair. "Dad, you should have forced me to listen." Tom exhaled. "Jason, you're not a child, you're a grown man. And you had every opportunity to hear me, every warning, every hesitation, every time I begged you to slow down. You chose the Pierces, not me." Jason's jaw clenched. "This is still your fault. If you had just helped financially, if you hadn't pulled away, none of this would have spiraled." Tom let out a tired, exhausted laugh. Not mocking, just painfully honest. "Jason, I've been helping financially for years, quietly. Behind the scenes, more than you remember. But this, what you're asking now, this isn't help, it's enabling." Jason stared, eyes darting, panic rising behind them. "Dad, please." Tom shook his head. "No." Jason swallowed, voice trembling with anger. "You're choosing yourself over your own son." Tom didn't flinch. "I'm choosing sanity and survival." There was a beat of silence, long, tense, suffocating. Then Tom said the words he had avoided until now, letting them fall clean and heavy. "I know about the house, Jason, the ownership structure, my 51%. Jason's face drained of what little color remained. "What?" "You heard me," Tom said. "I know exactly how the mortgage was written. I know exactly what power I hold. You didn't tell Lindsay. You didn't tell her parents. And now everything you've been hiding is catching up to you." Jason stumbled back as if the floor had tilted under him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Tom wasn't powerless. Tom wasn't cornered. Tom wasn't the weak link Edward painted him to be. Tom had leverage. More leverage than Jason ever wanted him to know. Jason opened his mouth, but no words came out, only a cracked breath. And in that silent, shattered second, the front door opened again. Lindsay stood there, suitcase in hand, face hard as stone. She didn't even look at Tom. She looked straight at Jason. "This is too much," she snapped. "I'm staying at my parents' for now. Figure your mess out." She turned and stormed out. The door slammed. Her car engine roared. And she was gone. Jason sank onto the couch like a man who had finally realized the fire he'd been stoking had burned everything but the truth. Tom watched him, exhausted, hollow but resolute. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel victorious. He felt tired and done. Because for the first time in his life, Tom wasn't fighting to keep his son afloat. He was fighting to keep himself alive in the wreckage. And he knew the next move, the decisive one, was coming soon. The envelope looked ordinary, thin, white, resting on Tom's porch in the weak morning light. But the moment he picked it up, he felt something wrong in the weight of it. Official mail never came lightly. His name was printed in a bold serif font, and beneath it the sender, Pierce and Associates Lending Group. Tom carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and stared at it for a long moment. Then he opened it with careful hands. The words hit him like a punch. Notice of intent to secure collateral, 224 Greenhill Drive. Jason's house. The house Tom owned 51% of. Collateral. Pierce was attempting to leverage the property, Jason's home, for one of his fraudulent ventures, using the house as security before the investigation could freeze his assets. It was a desperate move, the kind a criminal makes when the walls are closing in. Tom's pulse thudded in his ears. If this had gone through, if he hadn't seen it, Jason would have lost everything. The home he fought for, the home he lied about, the home he built his marriage and identity around, it would have been gone, swallowed whole by Pierce's sinking empire. Tom grabbed his phone, hands steady despite the fury rising inside him. He dialed Rachel. She answered instantly. "Tom, everything okay?" "No," Tom said. "We have a problem, a big one. Pierce is trying to use the house as collateral." Rachel exhaled sharply. "He can't, not without majority permission." Tom replied, voice flat, "And I have 51%. T. Silence, then a sharp rustle of papers on her end. "Email me the notice right now. I'll file an injunction. We'll stop this before it's processed." Tom scanned the document and sent it immediately. Rachel worked fast. Within minutes, she confirmed. "Block is in place. I'll send the formal notice to the lender. Pierce's attempt is void." Tom closed his eyes, relief trembling through him, but not comfort, not satisfaction, something darker, something colder. Because he had just saved Jason's house. Again. And Jason didn't even know it was at risk. News traveled faster than Tom expected. By afternoon, Jason appeared at his doorstep, pale, breathless, still in the clothes he'd woken up in. "Dad, what happened? I got a call from the lender. They said the collateral request fell through. They said someone blocked it." Tom didn't move. "I blocked it." Jason blinked. "You what?" "Pierce tried to leverage your house," Tom said. "My house. Because legally I own more of it than you do." Jason swayed, grabbing the back of a chair. "Oh my God." "He was going to put you on the hook for his fraud," Tom continued, voice quiet but unwavering. "You would have lost everything." Jason sank onto the couch. "Dad, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Tom studied him. The panic, the confusion, the last thin layer of denial peeling away. Jason whispered, "I was moments away from signing something he sent over last night. Lindsay told me to trust him. She said you were overreacting." Tom nodded once. "You were moments away from losing your home, and you didn't even see it." Jason buried his face in his hands. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have listened. I didn't know what I was doing." Tom stepped forward, not angry, not triumphant, just honest. "You shoved me aside," he said. "Long before Christmas, long before the deal. You pushed me out of your life the moment the Pierces started telling you who to be." Jason looked up, eyes rimmed red. Tom continued, voice heavy with truth. "I only returned the favor on paper." The silence between them was thick, full of everything they had said, everything they hadn't, everything that had been broken piece by piece. Jason whispered, "Dad, please don't take the house from me." Tom shook his head. "I'm not taking it, I'm protecting it because you can't." Jason closed his eyes, ashamed. That evening, Lindsay learned the truth. And the explosion was immediate. She showed up at Tom's house furious, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't do this," she snapped. "You can't take control of our home. Jason is the owner, not you." Tom stayed calm. "The ownership documents say otherwise." Lindsay froze. "Jason didn't tell me about that." "No," Tom said, "he didn't." Her expression shifted, anger to disbelief to something like fear. "So you're telling me you can overrule decisions about the property?" "Yes." She backed up a step, rattled, suddenly aware of just how much power Tom had quietly held all along. "This is ridiculous. This is manipulation." "No," Tom said softly. "This is the consequence of years of ignoring the truth." Lindsay sputtered, shook her head, and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Jason watched her leave, shoulders caving inward. He whispered, "Dad, what happens now?" Tom didn't answer immediately. He looked at the papers on his table, the leverage he'd never wanted but now needed. He saw the fractures in his family, the damage Pierce had done, the mistakes Jason had made, and the line he himself had finally drawn. "What happens now," Tom said, "is that I take control of what I should have protected a long time ago." For the first time in months, he felt steady. Sharp. Certain. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was taking action. And everything was about to change. It happened on a windy Tuesday morning, one of those days when the sky looked bruised and restless, as if the weather itself sensed something was breaking. Tom was finishing a second cup of coffee when his phone buzzed. This time it was Jason, or Lindsay, or some neighbor whispering the latest rumor. It was Detective Aaron Matson. "Mr. Beckett," she said, breath steady, crisp, professional. "I wanted you to hear it from me. Edward Pierce has been taken into custody. Multiple counts, fraud, falsified investment records, illegal collateralization. He'll be arraigned today." Tom closed his eyes for a moment. The breath he released felt like it carried months, maybe years of strain. "Thank you for letting me know." "You should also know," Matson added, "your son is officially cleared. We found no indication he knowingly participated. He was used." Tom nodded, grateful and heartbroken in equal measure. "I figured." "I'll keep you updated," she said, then hung up. Tom stood at the window, letting the news sink in. Pierce was finished. The web he spun so skillfully had collapsed at last, leaving only wreckage behind. And Jason was free of criminal ties, yet burdened by something almost heavier: humiliation. Word spread fast. By midday, the local news announced the arrest. Photos of Edward Pierce in handcuffs flashed across every screen, his polished confidence replaced with the dazed look of a man whose kingdom had crumbled beneath his feet. Jason saw it all. Tom didn't have to be there to know how deeply it hit him. He imagined Jason sitting alone in the office he barely used anymore, watching the man he trusted, idolized, dragged out in front of reporters, exposed as a fraud. And behind every humiliation was the unmistakable realization: he had chosen the wrong side and hurt the person who tried to warn him. Lindsay reacted exactly as Tom expected. She didn't comfort Jason. She didn't defend him. She turned on him. Faster than a cold wind, snapping the last leaves from a tree. By evening, she stood in their living room with a suitcase and a face carved in fury. "You embarrassed me," she spat at Jason. "Everyone thinks we were involved. Everyone thinks I knew. I can't stay in this mess." Jason tried to reason with her, hands trembling. "Lindsay, I didn't know, I swear." "I don't care," she snapped. "I'm going to my parents. Stay here and deal with the disaster you made." She left without looking back. Neighbors later told Tom they watched her peel out of the driveway like the whole house was on fire behind her. And Jason, already cracked, finally broke. Tom didn't rush over, didn't call, didn't try to fix the fallout. He kept his distance, not out of cruelty but out of wisdom. Some consequences needed space to settle, and Jason needed to feel this deeply, fully, without Tom cushioning the blow. Still, the weight of it pressed on Tom. It's a strange kind of ache, watching your child fall, not because of what you did, but because of what you couldn't save him from. Sarah sensed it immediately when she checked on him that night. She found Tom sitting on the porch, the quiet dusk wrapped around him. "You heard?" she asked softly. Tom nodded. She sat beside him, looping her arm through his. "Dad, you did everything you could, more than most parents ever would. What Jason's facing now, he built that road himself." Tom swallowed. He looked up to Pierce. He trusted him, and I couldn't pull him away. Sarah's voice cracked with tenderness. "Dad, you can't save someone who doesn't want saving. All you can do now is be steady when he eventually looks for solid ground again." Tom leaned back, letting her words settle. The porch light cast soft shadows against the yard, and for the first time in months, the night felt a little less heavy. The knock came just after 10 p.m. Soft, hesitant, nothing like the angry pounding from weeks earlier. Tom opened the door to find Jason standing there, deflated, exhausted, eyes red-rimmed. He didn't look like a grown man. He looked like a boy who'd finally run out of places to hide. "Dad," Jason's voice cracked, "can I talk to you?" Tom stepped aside. "Come in." Jason sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles whitened. He stared at them for a long moment before he finally spoke. "I didn't know," he whispered. "About Pierce, about the deals, about the lies. I thought he believed in me." Tom didn't speak. He let the silence fill the space, allowed Jason to pour the truth out on his own. "I hurt you," Jason said. "I pushed you away. I chose them, and when everything got hard they left. You didn't." Tom's chest tightened. Jason finally looked up, eyes glassy. "Dad, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fix any of this. I don't even know where to start." Tom hesitated, not because he didn't care, but because the old pattern could so easily return. Jason leans, Tom carries, and nothing changes. But this moment was different. Jason wasn't demanding, wasn't blaming, wasn't hiding behind Lindsay or Pierce. For the first time in years, he was asking. Truly asking. "Dad," Jason whispered, voice raw, "can you help me figure out what comes next?" Tom looked at him for a long moment, seeing not the entitled man from weeks ago, but the son he once held as a baby, the boy who used to run to him when life was too big. He didn't answer right away. He didn't promise anything. But he listened. And listening, after everything that had happened, was the first step forward neither of them had been able to take in a very long time. The weeks after Pierce's arrest settled over the town like a cautious spring, warmer but unpredictable. Nothing changed overnight, but the air felt different, the tension easing inch by inch. And somewhere inside that slow thaw, Jason began trying to rebuild what had fallen apart, his business, his life, and the part of himself he'd nearly handed over to the Pierces entirely. His office lights, once dark most mornings, started glowing again at dawn. Tom noticed it on his early walks, Jason's truck parked outside, his silhouette moving from desk to desk, cleaning, organizing, resurrecting the pieces of a life that had collapsed under pressure and pride. Clients were hesitant but not gone. A few loyal ones returned, cautiously giving him small projects. Jason approached each one with a humility Tom had never seen before, measured, careful, grateful. But rebuilding wasn't just about the business. It was about the father he had fractured along the way. One evening, Jason stopped by Tom's house, not storming, not demanding. He knocked softly, hands in his pockets, posture humble. Tom was in the living room going through mail when the knock came, and he opened the door to find Jason staring at the porch boards like they held the answers to his life. "Dad," Jason said quietly, "can I ask you something?" Tom stepped aside. "Come in." Jason sat at the table, shoulders squared as if bracing for judgment. But Tom didn't judge. He waited. "It's about work," Jason said. "I got offered a small renovation job. I'm trying to figure out how to bid it without losing money. Before, I would have asked you for funds to cover the upfront costs, but I'm not doing that now." He glanced up. "I just want advice, that's all." The humility in his voice settled deep in Tom's chest. "All right," Tom said. "Show me what you have." Jason unfolded papers, measurements, estimates. Tom looked them over, gave suggestions, pointed out shortcuts to avoid, mistakes to watch for, ways to earn trust back one customer at a time. It wasn't money and it wasn't rescue. It was guidance. The kind a father gives a son who's finally ready to listen. When they finished, Jason exhaled. "Thanks, Dad." Tom gave a small nod. "You're doing the work, that's what matters." Sarah visited 2 days later, carrying takeout from their favorite diner. She kicked off her shoes, sat at the table, and unwrapped burgers while Tom filled her in on Jason's progress. She listened, then smirked. "Good, but he still owes you something." Tom raised a brow. "What's that?" "A real apology," she said firmly, "not a half-hearted "I messed up." An actual acknowledgement of what he did. He can't move forward without saying it, and you can't either. Tom looked down at his fries. "He's trying." "Trying isn't the same as owning it," she said. "He needs to say the words. He needs to face what he did to you. Otherwise, this all falls apart again." Tom knew she was right, but he also knew Jason was fragile, like someone stitching himself together for the first time in years. "Give him time, Sarah," he said softly. She sighed, leaning back. "Time, yes, avoidance, no." It happened on a Thursday night. Jason came over again after work, tension in his shoulders but something softer in his eyes. He sat at the table across from Tom, hands clasped. "Dad," he said quietly, "there's something I need to say." Tom waited, heart settling into a slow, steady rhythm. Jason swallowed, voice trembling. "I let pride ruin everything. I let myself believe Pierce was who I needed to become, and I pushed you aside because I was ashamed. Ashamed of needing you, ashamed of where I came from, ashamed of not being enough for Lindsay's world. And instead of facing that, I hurt you. Again and again." Tom's eyes softened. Jason continued. "You didn't deserve that, you never did, and I'm sorry. For the shove, for the lies, for choosing them over you. For not listening, for blaming you when things fell apart. I was wrong." Silence filled the room, not the cold kind that had lived between them for months, but something gentler, waiting. Tom nodded steady. "Thank you for saying that." Jason's voice cracked. "I should have said it sooner." "Maybe," Tom replied, "but you're saying it now." Jason looked down, shame still lingering. "I don't expect you to forget everything." Tom leaned forward slightly. "Jason, I'm not perfect either. I should have held boundaries sooner. I let things slide because I was afraid of losing you. I kept quiet when I should have spoken up. And that silence, it didn't help you. It enabled you. We both played our part." Jason looked up surprised. "Dad, it was you." Tom gave a gentle, tired smile. "It was both of us, but we're here now. That's what matters." Jason nodded slowly, relief loosening his shoulders. After that night, their conversations changed. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually, like two people learning how to speak a language they'd once known but forgotten. Jason asked questions instead of assuming answers. Tom offered guidance without stepping into financial rescue. They talked about work, about life, about the mess they were sorting through. And each time the distance shrank another inch. Healing didn't come with declarations. It came in the little moments, the honest ones, the ones they'd never allowed themselves before. And as spring crept in, warming the edges of the town, Tom felt something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. Fragile, cautious hope. But real. Growing quietly, just like the rebuild. Spring melted slowly into early summer, and with it came a gentler rhythm, one Tom hadn't felt in years. Gone were the frantic phone calls, the shouting, the demands. Jason's world, once so loud with chaos and pressure, had quieted. In that quiet, something important happened. He began to steady himself. Jason's business didn't explode back to life overnight, but it grew in small, honest steps. Each week brought one or two new jobs, porch repairs, basement refinishing, modest renovation projects that didn't require loans, favors, or risky partners. He handled them with a careful precision, showing up early, staying late, earning back trust the old-fashioned way. And through all of it, Tom noticed something striking. Jason no longer mentioned the Pierces. Not a single comment. No, Edward said. No, Lindsay's parents think. Nothing. It was as if a storm had passed and washed the entire vocabulary from his system. Instead, Jason talked about measurements, timelines, tool rentals, and mistakes he almost made but caught in time. Real work, real growth. One afternoon, while they reviewed a project plan spread across Tom's kitchen table, Jason paused, tapping a pencil against his notes. "Dad, Lindsay reached out," he said quietly. Tom looked up slowly. "What did she say?" Jason swallowed. "She wants to talk. She says she wants to work things out, that she acted out of stress, that she didn't mean half the things she said." There was a time, months earlier, when Jason would have jumped at the chance, when the sound of Lindsay's voice would have guided every decision he made. But now, hesitation lingered in his eyes, real hesitation. Tom set down his coffee. "And how do you feel about that?" Jason stared at the project plans for a moment as if the answer might be hiding inside the measurements. "I don't know," he admitted. "I loved her. I mean, I still do somewhere. But after everything, I'm not sure I can trust that it would be different." Tom nodded gently. "Then don't rush it. Reconciliation only works if both people change, not just one, and certainly not only you." Jason sighed, shoulders slumping a little. "What if I make the wrong choice?" Tom gave him a small, knowing smile. "Then you learn, but this time choose for you, not for what her parents want, not for what looks good, not for anyone's approval." Jason took that in slowly, and Tom saw something shift in him, something grounded, something finally independent. It was the first time Jason had spoken about Lindsay without fear driving the conversation. The first time he saw the choice as his rather than an obligation. "That helps," Jason said quietly. Later that week, Jason told Lindsay he needed time, real time, to figure out if rebuilding their marriage was healthy or just familiar. Her reaction wasn't explosive like before. If anything, she seemed surprised by the firmness in his voice. She didn't storm out. She didn't demand. She simply nodded, and that alone told Tom how much things had changed. As summer approached, Jason's life began to take shape around his own choices. He rented a small office separate from the old Pierce-associated property, rebranded his business, bought new tools with money he earned, not money he begged for. He didn't lean on Tom financially, not once, only for advice, perspective, or grounding. And Tom found he enjoyed these conversations, simple, calm, steady, the kind he'd hoped for years ago but never thought he'd truly have. Sarah visited often, sometimes after long shifts, sometimes just to share a sandwich and check on her dad. She'd sit at the dining table, watching Tom with a mix of admiration and relief. "You know," she said one evening, "I've never been prouder of you. You found your boundaries. You stayed strong. You stopped sacrificing yourself for people who didn't see it." Tom chuckled softly. "Took me long enough." "But you got there," Sarah said, squeezing his hand. "That's what matters." And she was right. For the first time in years, Tom felt something he almost didn't recognize at first: peace. Not the fragile, temporary kind. The steady kind. The kind that settled into a man's bones after he's made the hard decisions, faced the storm, and come out with himself intact. He'd protected what mattered. He'd reclaimed his dignity. He'd watched his son rebuild honestly, humbly, without manipulation guiding him. And as the seasons shifted around him, Tom realized something he never expected. He felt whole again. The invitation didn't come through a rushed phone call or a text typed under pressure. It came quietly, thoughtfully. A folded note left on Tom's porch in Jason's handwriting, the same looping, uneven script he'd had since he was a boy. "Dad, I'm cooking dinner Friday. Just us. I'd like you to come. Jason." There was no guilt in the message. No underlying plea. No desperation. Just an invitation, simple, steady, genuine. Tom read it twice, then held it for a moment longer than necessary. Something inside him, something long bruised, warmed gently. Friday arrived with clear skies and the faint scent of summer drifting through the air. Tom drove to Jason's house, their house in a technical sense, though for the first time he didn't feel the weight of that ownership. He parked in the driveway and stood still for a few seconds. The porch light was on, casting a soft glow, and through the window he could see movement. Jason setting plates, adjusting silverware, stepping back to check if everything looked right. It was modest, not the lavish, Pierce's approved decor from years past. No imported centerpiece. No stiff formality. Just a small table, warm lighting, real effort. When Tom knocked, Jason opened the door with a smile that wasn't forced. "Hey, Dad, come in." The house was quieter than Tom remembered it. No tension humming in the air. No echo of arguments. Lindsay wasn't there by design, Tom suspected. Tonight wasn't about repairing a marriage. It was about repairing something older. Jason gestured to the dining room. The table was set for 3 simple plates, folded napkins, and a roast chicken that smelled far better than Tom expected his son could manage. But what caught Tom's attention wasn't the food. It was the chair at the head of the table. His chair. Empty, waiting. Jason noticed him looking and cleared his throat. "Dad, sit here, where you belong." The words hit deeper than Jason probably realized. Tom swallowed, feeling a quiet ache loosen inside his chest, not pain but release. Something healing, knitting back together after years of strain. He nodded and took his seat. "You didn't have to do all this," Tom said softly. Jason sat across from him, hands clasped in a measured, steady way. "I did. I owe you more than I can ever say. This is a start." Before Tom could respond, the front door opened and Sarah stepped in, carrying a small tin of brownies. "I figured you boys might want dessert," she said, smiling. Jason laughed, an actual laugh, not the brittle one he used to force. Perfect timing. They ate together, not rushed, not uncomfortable. Jason told a story about a client who insisted on building a bookshelf without measurements. Sarah teased him about his cooking, and he took it good-naturedly. Tom chimed in here and there, but mostly he listened, absorbing the moment. The room felt calm, rich with something long missing: safety, warmth, acceptance. At one point, Jason paused, looking between them. "Thank you," he said, "for giving me space to figure things out, and for not giving up on me." Tom shook his head gently. I didn't fix your life, Jason. You did that. I just stepped aside so you could see what needed repairing. Jason nodded, eyes glossy but steady. I get that now. Sarah lifted her glass of iced tea. To progress, she said. Slow, messy, real progress. Jason raised his glass. Tom did the same. They clinked them together, a soft sound, but one that felt like a milestone. Dinner stretched into conversation. Conversation drifted into laughter. And for the first time in years, Tom felt the knot in his chest loosen entirely. There was no tension at this table. No competition with the Pierces. No manipulation. No guilt. Just family, reconnecting in the simplest way possible. A meal shared, burdens lighter, hearts open. Tom glanced at Jason and Sarah across the table and thought, maybe this is what rebuilding really looks like. Not dramatic apologies or grand gestures, but a quiet dinner, an honest seat, and a place where he finally felt he belonged. Snow fell the way it used to, soft, steady, the kind that wrapped the neighborhood in a quiet blanket of white instead of the heaviness Tom felt last year. He woke early, not out of obligation or dread, but out of something he hadn't felt in a long time: anticipation. For the first time in many years, Christmas would be held at his home, his table, his space. No power dynamics, no peer-sized shadows in the corners, just family, his family, returning to him not because they needed something, but because they wanted to be there. He moved through the kitchen slowly, enjoying the familiar rhythm of holiday preparation. The roast was already marinating. Cranberries simmered softly on the stove. Cinnamon and butter lingered in the air like an old memory revived. At 9:08 a.m., Tom heard a car pull into the driveway, Jason's truck. He arrived early on purpose. Tom opened the door before Jason could knock. "Merry Christmas, Dad," Jason said, carrying bags of groceries and a folded tablecloth tucked under his arm. His smile was gentle, humble, warm. "Merry Christmas," Tom replied. "You didn't have to bring anything." Jason shrugged. "I wanted to help, show me where to set things." Tom gestured him in. They worked side by side in the kitchen, Jason chopping vegetables, Tom stirring sauces, the kind of teamwork they hadn't shared since Jason was a teenager helping with home projects. There was an ease between them now, built not from dependency but from repair. A steady, mutual respect. When the table was ready to be set, Jason walked into the dining room and paused. The long wooden table stood polished and ready, the good plates laid out in neat stacks. "Dad," he said, "don't touch the chairs, I've got this part." Tom stepped back, watching. Jason carried the chairs one by one, placing them with quiet intention. And when he reached the head of the table, the seat Tom had avoided for so long, Jason didn't hesitate. He pulled the chair out, angled it perfectly, and rested his hand on the back of it. When he looked at Tom, there was no guilt, no awkwardness, only sincerity. "Dad," he said softly, "sit here, where you belong." Tom felt his throat tighten. Not with pain this time. With healing. Before he could answer, the front door swung open and Sarah stepped inside, brushing snow from her coat. "Well, look at that," she said, grinning as she spotted Jason arranging the table. Jason Beckett voluntarily setting a table must be a Christmas miracle. Jason rolled his eyes, but there was no spark of irritation, just a playful smile. "Don't start." "I'm proud of you," Sarah added, touching his shoulder. "Both of you, actually." They finished preparing the table together, candles lit, plates set, glasses shining. The house, once heavy with silence, now hummed with warmth. When the food was finally ready, they took their seats. Jason waited, actually waited, until Tom sat first. Not out of forced respect, but because he meant it, because he understood what that seat had cost them both. As they began to eat, Jason cleared his throat. "Dad, I want to say something before the chaos starts." Sarah smirked. "Here we go." Jason ignored her gently. He looked at Tom with a steadiness that came from months of hard-earned growth. "Thank you," he said, "for saving me when I didn't deserve it, and for standing firm when I tried to push you away. You didn't just keep me from losing everything. You showed me who I was becoming and who I didn't want to be." Tom swallowed, emotion gathering behind his eyes. Jason continued, "I'm not perfect. I've got a lot to make up for, but I'm trying, Dad, every day, and I'm grateful you didn't give up on me." Sarah raised her glass. "To Dad, the spine of this family." Tom chuckled softly, shaking his head, but inside something settled. Something long unsettled finally found its place. They ate together, talked together, and laughed, deep, genuine laughter, without tension, without resentment lurking under the surface. It was simple. It was honest. It was the kind of Christmas Tom had almost forgotten was possible. And when he looked at Jason and Sarah across the table, their faces warm in the glow of the candles, he knew something had changed forever. He hadn't just reclaimed his respect. He had rebuilt his family from the fracture outward, piece by piece, boundary by boundary. When the conversation quieted and plates emptied, Tom leaned back in his chair, feeling the moment settle around him like the soft fall of snow outside. Tom sits at the head of the table, finally seen, finally valued, the place that had always been his.